got to go out of town for Mother's Day. And, it's great because there's this picture I actually took in the car as a selfie with the baby Reverend over my shoulder. And I've got my pistachio latte, and I look so bright and so hopeful and looking forward to spending this Saturday out with my family, because I'm not big on crowds. I think I've talked about that before. That's just not, it surprises people because I've done improv and performance and stuff like that, yada, yada. Shocking to many, actually, a lot of people who do stuff like that don't necessarily like big crowds. But anyway, so I prefer to not go out on Mother's Day and do traditional Mother's Day things. So, taking me to a town to check out nearby that's like a cool weekend visit, right on my okay list. So we get up and the baby Reverend, lost his lunch a little bit. We thought we had kind of a little bit of an explanation for it because then he was fine for several hours before we decided to take our journey. But fast forward, he did great. And this is hours of driving, right? This isn't just 10 minutes and we're there. And so we go, he gets to check out these playgrounds, really fun time. And I'm like, oh, this is great. It's a beautiful day. There's checking out the water, the walkway with the riverfront and everything. And so then we go to the mall and I'm holding him and we go upstairs to the food court because, he was starting to act a little bit, getting tired or something at one of the play areas that we had stopped at. And I don't know if it was the smell of the food or just the magical moment to just do the stereotypical mortifying thing as a parent of just and so I have to run. I just bolt to the nearest trash can. And of course, not to get too gross for anybody who has sensitive stomachs, all over me, all over everything. I mean, granted, fortunately for me, all he had at that point was mango applesauce and a strawberry kiwi Pedialyte, So at least I walked away from it smelling a tropical breeze. And not so much vanilla milk or anything easily yuck like that, right? So that was my Mother's Day, which then fast forward to all of us now have had our cycle of this stomach flu because here we're recording this on May 13th. So Mother's Day was just this past weekend. I know sometimes we record these way ahead. These happen to be a little bit more true to time, guys. So yeah, so that was my fun Mother's Day, right? And then I love that my awesome son gave me his first truly homemade gift, right? Because he made this completely himself. He picked it out somewhere. He doesn't remember where. But, gave it to me, and then I got to share it with the Mr. Reverend. So thus, I am, full disclosure, recording in a fuzzy robe on the first day I woke up feeling human.
Well, welcome to the club. Obviously at 3, you've probably had all kinds of body fluids cover your body at this point from the baby Reverend, but there's a special comfort as a parent to have your child just be all over you.
Oh, right. Just he wanted to make sure I had the Mother's Day sash is what it was. I am just so grateful that we didn't have some kind of breakfast burrito or something. And no more he was fine for a while. We made the best guess we could as parents, and then totally came back kind of bit us in the ass, but in a way still kind of fun memories because I process and deflect with humor. It's just kind of my go-to in life. Tim's nodding very enthusiastically. He kind of knows. I even get in trouble because I try to make jokes in moments where other people aren't ready to deflect with humor. It is one of my character flaws. I try so hard not to do it, but the thing is it's for me because I'm starting to have feelings, right? So but no, there was part of me that wanted to be all grumpy about it because then on Mother's Day was the day that I first felt sick. So it was just this continuation of what the fudge? What is this Mother's Day?
Well, I've had plenty of experiences with my kids, doing all of that, and working with dogs now. There are plenty of times to where all of a sudden they will just out of nowhere go nuts. we had this boxer the other day who threw up, but it came out of nowhere. And the boxer out of nowhere just, and it was like exorcist level vomit everywhere. And oh man, what a mess that was to clean up. But
Man, we've actually gotten pretty lucky with the baby Reverend. This is our first actual stomach bug, like since he's been like cognizant, and to make it all the way to after 3 to have that happen, because like, yeah, he spit up on me all the time when that was the normal thing for the digestive tract of my newborn and infant, right? Like they do that. That's just something, you can't help it. Like there's, as long as it's not excessive, it's totally normal. So anyway, as he is just like chattering right next to me right now, so I think a lot more of it's coming through. So full disclosure, guys, we are playing with some of our audio settings, so you might notice if more stuff comes through, we're going to probably try to tinker more in the future. But anyway, yeah, so the kind of adorable and sad thing that happened was the first time that he got sick, like I took him to the toilet and tried to get him cleaned up and everything. And he just like looks right at me and goes, "Cece, what happened?" Because he just didn't understand. Like his body just ejected everything.
And it's frustrating too, because like kind of like cats, when they do throw up or do anything like that, they never really take that time to think about those feelings that are happening and be like, oh, maybe I need to go to the bathroom right now and be in front of the toilet or be in front of something to where I could puke and it's not going to make a mess. It's just, oh, time to puke.
Yep. And then I remember, full disclosure, I just remember I was one of those kids that I would fight it and fight, like, nope, not gonna. And then it just resulted in so much mess. So it's like, I'm trying to be patient through this with him. It's like, hey, buddy, like, yep, it's no different than when you feel like you gotta poop or you gotta pee. Like, it's just listening to your body. And then what's kind of funny is I almost like the order that this happened in, because he got sick, I got sick, and then the Mr. Reverend got sick. And so, like, no, I actually took it as a teaching moment, because that's me. Like, big surprise, I am nauseatingly constantly teaching. Like when it comes to the baby Reverend, it's just my tack. But you know, it's like the moments like this that I take, and I was like, see, like I could tell that my stomach, we like have this whole thing with like the monster in his tummy, like from this silly songs thing on one of his Yodo cards. And so the way we've kind of like processed this with him in ways that, terms that he sort of understands, is the monster in his tummy like is angry, and maybe there's a bug in there and he's like stomping around and trying to get this bug. So sometimes like that, he's angry. So if he's angry, like stuff might come out, right? Like he might be trying to throw stuff out that's either making him upset or to try to get this bug, right? Because either we ate something that we don't like or we've got some kind of virus. Those are like the top 2 reasons kids throw up. Yeah. So that's, I don't know, it's just the analogy that very naturally came up. So if anybody likes that, feel free to take it. But yeah, like, so we got to kind of explain it. And then like when the Mr. Reverend was getting sick, like, see, daddy could tell with his tummy. And that's why he just got up and went to the bathroom. So, you know, just the no shame around it type of thing. And even though this kid has had his first like real stomach bug, still knocking potty training out of the park. Got to show you at the front of the show that, you know, he got to earn, he's 15 days, like over 15 days technically. So we got him some Spider-Man pajamas, like the costume style. So the body looks like the Miles version of Spider-Man, and it was a 2 set. So he's got Peter Parker too, because at least this toy can't be thrown at my face mid-recording. Isn't that right, Tim?
That's right. But something to keep in mind for the future, for as long as he is a Spider-Man fan, of course. One of the creators of the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man is writer Brian Michael Bendis, who lives in Portland, Oregon, and and will often be a part of like local events in town to where it's possible to get autographs. He's very popular. I know when I saw him at Comic-Con one year, he's also very generous with fans as well. Like he'll do Q&As, and then, the person will ask the question, he'll answer, and then he'll be like, okay, come on up and get your new drone, and give somebody who just asked a silly question about a comic book a new drone. But something to keep in mind for him, if, somewhere down the road, if he ever wants to meet the guy who created Miles Morales.
Well, speaking of people who might want to meet Miles, somebody who created Miles Morales, it looks like our friends are showing up. Hello, friends. It is I, the Reverend Tracy, and co-hosting, as seems to be the usual, with my friend Tim the nerd. How are you doing today, Tim?
I am doing good. It's a little bit of a rainy day here in Portland, Oregon, but if the weather report is correct, it won't be raining much when I'm with the dogs. So thank goodness.
Oh, yes, it is windy AF here today. We have it's supposed to be up in the 20, 25 mile per hour range, which is, like I mentioned before, we get wind here. That's kind of a weather quirk of this area. Yeah, here we are, the week after Mother's Day, and here we get to talk about
Stepmoms, yes.
because yes, I know it is not on anybody's calendar, but true to form, much like Stepmother's Day being the week after Mother's Day, we are going to do a psychology of a stepmom after we've done kind of 2 weeks in a row of kind of focusing on mom leading up to Mother's Day. I mean, it's great. I know obviously all of these topics hit me personally, as I am both a mother and a stepmother. Yeah, we figured why not go ahead and talk about something that doesn't get talked about a lot, which is the psychology of a stepmom, like what they kind of go through, slash we, right? Because I'm in this group. There's a lot of this out there. There's a growing demographic of blended families. We talked about that before in other episodes. Just kind of that this is a very, it's a very important part of our culture. And not talking about the psychology of a pretty significant demographic of our culture is kind of not doing that demographic justice. So here I am. I'm going to try my best to tiptoe guiding through this. I by no means speak for all stepmoms or anything. I just wanted to try to find some interesting concepts to talk about. And then what's great is, yeah, this will actually air right after what would be Stepmother's Day, the Sunday afterwards, which kind of one of the petty jokes is that, of course, Stepmom's Day has to be the Sunday after Mother's Day, because if you ever put a stepmother before a mother, you'd never hear the end of it. That is, like I said, it is a popular joke in there, but we'll get into the fact that that is the culture. That those are the kind of jokes that kind of get made because there's kind of a whole cultural thing that affects mental health towards a stepmother.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking as a step parent myself, even though I'm not a big fan of that term, just because to me it's like if you're going to be a parent, you're going to be a parent, I guess. I mean, step is kind of like more of a legal term than anything else. But, I know with my oldest,
Right.
my son, he's always just called me dad. I've always just called him son, and all that stuff. But to your point, it's something that, has been around, but not really talked about as well, because it's like you are expected as a step parent to have all of that love for that kid there without caring about any of the extra responsibilities that comes with it. You're supposed to not to, that way when other people try to step in and, say, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're supposed to say, oh, okay. When it's messier than that.
Right, because it's well, it depends on the role, right? Who it is as to whether or not that's appreciated or wanted or valued, right? Or and sometimes, and we'll get into this too, sometimes the problem is the stepmom doesn't necessarily care. And that can be kind of equally damaging in the whole family system. And so, because stepmoms often occupy one of the strangest emotional positions in family systems, because we're expected to to emotionally invest like insiders while often structurally feeling like outsiders, right? And sometimes there's even constant reminders of being that outsider. And one of the hardest things psychologically about being a stepmom is that you can become deeply emotionally attached to a family system while never feeling fully secure inside it, right? And sometimes it makes a difference, in my personal situation. I happened to meet the Mr. Reverend, pretty close after separation and everything, right? But sometimes, these step parent roles don't come in for some time after, right? So unlike those biological parents, they're entering a very well established emotional ecosystem. And sometimes that ecosystem has already had its major adjustment to the separation having happened, right? So there's history there, there's attachment, there's conflict that already exists, routines, and grief that's already been gone through, right? And I almost think that can make it harder, like especially for kids in that state, like when there's been time, like when they've already had one major adjustment. So then they go, oh great, here's another adjustment. Right? Like, and I'm not saying that there's anything out there that I've read that says, oh, well, if you're going to get into a relationship, you better like just rush into it. My God, no. So many reasons to not do that. But just saying, like, I could see that having an effect, right? Like how many big waves the children of the situation end up going through. But right, you're right, though. There is still an immediate expectation for you to care deeply and help contribute to that stability for the kids.
I can see it being harder to, like, I know in your situation, you stepped into a step parent role with the bonus kiddos being slightly older than in my situation. Like my oldest, he was one when I, first met his mother. He wasn't like he was aware, of course, his biological dad was out of the picture, of course, but it's not anything he like remembers, because he was one, obviously. But being with older kids, I can imagine that there are a ton of extra struggles that can occur. It can start off nice, but then somewhere down the road not be nice. It can start off bad and then get nice down the road. It could just always be bad as well. You could have people, kids that are just upset. Like one reason my daughter doesn't talk to me is that I was quickly dating right after I split with her mom and everything. So there's a lot of monkey wrenches that can go in the works with older kids too.
Right, exactly. And that's like what I like, right, as they're older, like age can be dependent on this too. And I think that even goes into some of the things they find with family systems theory. That's largely developed by psychologist Murray Bowen, by the way. And it basically views families as emotional systems where every relationship affects every other relationship, essentially. So when you introduce a new adult into a family structure, especially after divorce, separation, or a major conflict, the emotional system has to reorganize. And that's what's really interesting is that step family researchers consistently talk about something called role ambiguity in this. Like, so these are the people that are connecting where step parents fall in these family systems theories, right? And this goes back to the emotional paradox where you feel deeply responsible for the well-being of the family, but you also feel like your role inside that system is very fragile or conditional, or it's not very clear, like where your help is wanted and under whom, and where your help is not wanted, etc. Because it's basically like, what exactly am I here? How much authority do I have? Or what emotional expectations exist? Am I support staff, parent, friend, butler, outsider? You know what I mean? Like just to kind of be funny about it, deflect with some humor there, but there really are like those questions. And it can change like kind of periodically, like even as people grow up or dynamics change, right? So it's interesting that there are people kind of looking at these dynamics and what they mean, and that there's real research trying to tie it to help make sense of it, like and how it plays into the health of not just family structures but also for children specifically too, and the real humans that we sometimes forget when we talk about families, that are the parents that are involved. because I do kind of think that that's something relevant as we go through, like, Mother's Day, Stepmother's Day, Father's Day, and Stepfather's Day, is that sometimes we do forget that these are adults and real humans that also still have feelings and are not perfect. And so, like, that's worth talking about. And like you had pointed at the beginning of the month, especially with May being Mental Health Month, it's kind of neat to kind of talk about kind of the sides of these that I don't feel like gets highlighted as much.
Yeah, because it does seem like there are times in step situations to where the step parent you can have one of the biological parents essentially push the step parent aside and be like, this is none of your concern. This is none of your business.
Right.
And try and not include the step parent in on things. Now, obviously, of course, there is a difference between, a partner is dating that just met the kids compared to, a relationship that's been happening for a couple of years, and everything with the kids and everything like that. But like a lot of times step parents are just told to step aside, and they're expected to not have any sort of reaction. They're just supposed to be like, okay, and it's not that simple.
That you're overreaching by having like any opinion of anything going on in your own home, and that is partly justified by a very, very familiar concept in our culture and our media, and that is the evil stepmother trope. Like, our culture has kind of successfully normalized distrusting stepmoms before they even speak. And even like a quick compare, because this might come up again, like if we parallel, because I know we're still talking about like Father's Day month, like if we end up paralleling this and talking about stepdads at all, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, because in a lot of our media, typically stepdads are lifted up more, like they step in. Right. But more often than not, like, stepmoms are portrayed as evil or permissible to hate. Like, and I think that really kind of helps, right? Because you and I have talked about it, and it's come up a lot more recently, I feel, in these topics, especially like doing illusions recently, is how something can get normalized through our television, through our media, through our movies and our TV shows. Right. And so, like, I still think back of watching, I think it was called Stepmom with Julia Roberts. And I forget, oh my gosh, it kills me that I can't think of her name right now, but I don't want to get distracted by Googling something. But so she is like the new stepmom. And at one point, the son looks at the lady playing the mom character. And, he was just talking about his weekend or whatever. And she was being, acceptably sassy, and kind of like, expressing her disapproval in what would have been considered like an okay way back in the day. And he just looks at her and says, "I'll hate her if you want me to." And it's just kind of interesting, right? Like, and that's kind of, kids don't normally say that out loud. And I thought it was such an interesting point, because that is the power that your opinion has, like with your own kids. So that being said, like, we do kind of have like this whole culturally kind of supported permission to be immediately distrusting of a stepmother.
And that movie was Stepmom from 1998 with Julia Roberts and Susan Sarandon, directed by Chris Columbus.
That's right, Susan Sarandon. There's a lot of movies that came out like that kind of tried to address like divorced families and splits and those dynamics. But that one is like a pretty good one, by the way. But right, and like, what's wild is that stepmoms might be one of the few family roles where there's an entire cultural archetype built around assuming they're dangerous, though, because you look at even Disney, and this goes back to when I first met my oldest stepchild. I just remember we were standing in the kitchen, and I think they were like 7 at the time, maybe 8. And they just looked at me and went, I always thought stepmoms were supposed to be evil. And I just remember thinking, thanks, Disney. Thanks a lot. Because, yeah, you got Cinderella, Snow White. The evil stepmother trope is everywhere. And it kind of got embedded in cartoons even, because where are the good stepmothers, Tim? not in early Disney cartoons that I could think of, right? Even though most people consciously know these are fictional stories, culturally, those ideas stick around in weird ways, right? Like, so a lot of stepmoms walk into family systems already carrying suspicion before they've actually done anything wrong, or big feelings here before anybody's even bothered to get to know them.
Yeah, and that is the danger of entertainment. I mean, I think the good thing about at least the streaming era of entertainment is that it has allowed more diverse stories to occur. What do I mean by that? In a situation like this, we're talking about stories about stepmoms that are not completely evil. You know, I mean, and to be clear, yeah, I'm sure there are some nasty stepmoms out there. Let's be honest, but that doesn't mean just because it was a Disney movie that every single one of them or 95% of them out there are going to be bad and evil. You know, stuff like this that can stunt people. People are influenced by their entertainment, whether they realize it or not, and let it guide their thoughts and opinions without forming an opinion for themselves based on the situation that they encounter.
Exactly. Because, like, a lot of what the assumptions are out there, like if you look at some of the portrayals of stepmothers in movies and TV, is that, you know, an underlying assumption is that they're trying to replace mom, that they're manipulative, they're controlling, or they're just interfering. And I think what makes this psychologically interesting is that people often interpret stepmom behavior through that lens, like before they interpret it through reality. Like, fun fact, like most people actually are inherently pretty good. Like most people aren't like wringing their fingers together and wahahaing and trying to hoard their resources or the money or the love. Like most people aren't actually factually like that. And I think this even coincides a little bit with what we've talked about in our social media world. Because if the algorithm picks up that you're in a blended family situation, you're going to get more stuff like that. And depending on what your algorithm has picked up about you is going to lean, is it going to accidentally be adding lighter fluid to a fire on a person that, if you're honest with yourself, you've not gotten to know and don't like, right? Is it going to fuel that of like stepmoms be the worst, or you know? And I'm not sure that what market is out there, right? Because I haven't been in that position. I do know kind of the stuff that started showing up in my feed after I became a stepmom, though, over time. And that was a little bit of kind of the sassy opposite of, you know, like moms always be over controlling and always be blah, 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 and like thinks love is limited and blah. Like, and granted, back when I first became a stepmom, you had a little bit more control over that, right? Like you could just kind of like, hey, I'm not interested in this, and kind of like just like, nope, you're wrong. Like that's not the message that I want. I follow like tiny Buddha and mindful Christianity. You know what I mean? Like I am not looking for this kind of messaging in my feed. That's not how I wanted to roll. So, but you know, if you're not fine tuning that, that's where like some of these messages can kind of continue, like even outside of movies and TV and the cartoons that we watched, like well into adulthood, even, right? Some of the Disney classics, like people still rewatch a lot of that today.
Yeah, and you know, I know you were talking about how most people are not like, you know, mustache twirling villains. You know, if you take a look at like Cinderella, for instance, and take a look at the stepmom in that story, like if you were looking at it with a critical eye, she's bad, but the decisions she's making are what she feels are good for her family. That is what makes a good villain, if that makes sense. You know, the best villains are ones that in their head are doing the right thing. You know, obviously, this is a woman who got into a relationship with a man that had a kid that she wasn't prepared for and did not like. And you know, ultimately is a story about, you know, when you're going into a relationship, make sure all those P's and Q's are taken care of beforehand.
Yeah, make sure you've kind of thought that decision through before you date somebody with a kid. Like being in stepmom groups, I was kind of appalled at some of the behaviors some of these women had towards children. Like I don't know, but that goes into kind of, that's my personal thing. I personally believe that if you're going to date somebody with children, you should at least consider loving them like your own. Like, you should consider being open to that. Because if you're not open to that, like, it's not cool. But you also need to be open to the other side too. That if they don't want that level from you, that you need to accept that and not push that either. Like, so it is kind of a big ask. And I can kind of understand where that is really hard, right? But essentially, you know, we see all of these ways, right? All of these portrayals. Now, the thing that you have in media and entertainment like Cinderella is you get to see behind the scenes when this person is alone. You get to see that they are actually menacing. You get to see that they are actually like very selfish in their thought processes, right? But you don't get that when you are assessing a real living human being in your life, right? And that almost goes back to that this accidentally lines up with a couple of really known psychological biases. And one of those being confirmation bias, right? And that's where people tend to notice information that confirms what they already expect to be true. Therefore, if they are viewing you through a lens and their assumption is that you're mwahahaing in the background, I can totally see, and this even goes to, you know, intent and impact can be different. But this can totally make the impact be that they are an evil person to you. Even if their intent is so far from that, because if you got to see the cutscenes of their life, you'd see that they're actually like, you know, some nights really giving a lot of emotional energy thinking about how to be involved in this family the best, or sometimes like crying in situations that you think that they're just like annoyed about. You know what I mean? So you're not getting that feedback. And if you are, it's kind of not good, because that means that the adult has done the bad thing and expressed emotion in front of the kids. Right? Because otherwise, the only way you'd get that information would be if, you know, you got the relationship between the step parent and parent to share that. And that's not something I would see happening if that's the dynamic. Like, right? Like, it's kind of, but anyway. So yeah, so if somebody already expects stepmoms to be controlling or harmful because this is kind of what's been fed as the thing that they have been most exposed to, neutral behavior can start getting interpreted through all that expectation, right? So all of that, just to kind of more cleanly say it that way. So there's also outgroup bias, right? Which is basically our tendency to view someone outside the established group as less trustworthy and more threatening. And that goes back into some of that family theory we talked about before, right, with family systems theory. And that's kind of, I think, what they're more looking into now is that you're bringing in this person and depending on the situation, it's outgrouping. And that is an entire field that people are trying to understand, is why we outgroup, why we still outgroup, and almost how we can tackle that. Like, kind of almost for the betterment of people, right? Because that whole like equality is better than division. Like, it would be nicer for us probably if we could figure out how to curb this like almost compulsion to outgroup.
But you know that's a lot to ask for a young kid. At least you know you would hope the adults in the situation would be a little more mindful and supportive, because you know ideally you know all those adults are supposed to be working together for the benefit of the kids and everything. But you know I think when it comes to the step role, like this is a role that almost comes preloaded with suspicion. You know.
Right. And it's it is hard. Yeah, and especially like in situations where, and unfortunately this is kind of a little more often than not, it feels that it's high conflict, right? Because there can be a level of hypervigilance that can form, because a high conflict blended family can keep a stepmom's nervous system constantly on edge. I'm going to put an asterisk here and say, obviously, this applies to everybody in the system, right? Like, a high conflict blended family can keep a mom's nervous system constantly on edge. It can keep a dad's, it can keep a stepdad's. Like, this is kind of the duh statement that I'm just going to say does apply to everybody. But for the purposes of our conversation today, we're going to kind of stick it in the realm of, what do you mean, the Reverend? Like, what do you mean? How does this affect a stepmom's nervous system? Like, what do you mean? This is just this person that exists here, right? Like, let's just go ahead and pretend that that's how that actually works, and not that you're living in an actual home and have feelings. But
Me? No.
yeah. Well, like I said, it's just kind of interesting. Like, and even some of the ways that this gets addressed in stepmom groups is like that you're supposed to somehow completely separate and not care to at the same time. And that's very complicated, especially when more people in the dynamic want you involved than people that don't want you involved, if that makes sense. But I do think this is one of the least talked about parts of being a stepmom, right? Because there can be this constant feeling that one wrong interaction can create a conflict that ripples through the whole family, right? And you're almost like mortified of ever being that way, right? And depending on the situation, that fear may not even be irrational, because you can have fear of legal escalation, a drama between the households, being blamed by literally anybody involved in it, fear of overstepping, financial instability, because I think anybody who's ever been involved in this stuff knows how incredibly expensive the family law system can get, like over anything. Fear of making things worse for your partners or the kids. And that's across the board, right? That's emotionally, that's financially, that's stability, however you would say it. That sentence I'm not thinking right now. But yeah, like stabilization, I guess. But yeah, so a lot of stepmoms end up existing in this chronic state of hypervigilance where they care deeply about the family system while also feeling emotionally unsafe inside it. And right, when people become more guarded, they become more anxious, more reactive, and more cautious. And I think this loops back to, so when somebody is operating at an anxious, reactive, or cautious level, a lot of the things they do might be misinterpreted as somebody who's being manipulative, controlling, and overbearing. Like, right, kind of going back to the evil stepmom trope. So this goes back to, okay, so somebody acting the way that totally makes sense when we step back and we remove like a stepmom from it, right? How somebody would act when they feel anxious, reactive, or cautious in a relationship dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. As a step parent, like even some doing something nice as a step parent could come across to one of the other biological parents as like, who do you think you are? I wouldn't do it that way. It's what is that identity bias? What do you call that?
Oh gosh, what was? Oh gosh, there's. I feel like I talked about that with mom recently, right? Like,
Yeah,
wasn't
I
that
think
one
it
of the
was.
biases that conflict, like as an adult, because there's hindsight bias. Oh, I wouldn't do it that way, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that the hindsight bias or something like that? Yeah. Anyway, we talked about it in the last episode.
yeah. We
but
swear we listen.
Yeah, we just talked about it in the last episode, though, of those conflicting biases near the end. Yeah, but I think maybe you're talking about hindsight bias, right? Like I wouldn't have done it that way.
That one too, but if another parent does something slightly different than how you would do it, um, I forgot that. I thought it was like identity
Yeah,
bias or something like that. The one
maybe.
where you question your where it's like I think we were talking about it last episode to where, the adult kids would go to the parent and say, well, I didn't like it when you did this, but the parent would get defensive because I was trying to, I put a roof over your head, a food in your belly.
Oh, I think that was just the concept in general I bring up. I feel like all the time of identity threat, like that when you feel
Identity
like
threat.
your identity is threatened, like that you take it as like somebody drawing back to like punch you in the face. Like your brain doesn't separate physical confrontation about to happen versus like that mental confrontation, like it reacts the same. Yeah, so there's part of that too, right? And then that even becomes even more so because when somebody tries to tell the stepmother how they are overstepping or how they are being overbearing, right, you can see, especially if somebody is kind of trying to be genuinely a good person in this dynamic and do the least harm, but still provide love and support and not really have a lot of expectations around getting things on like Mother's Day and stuff like that. Like when you don't have like your own child, right? This goes to that is part of it, right? You do the motherly roles, however often they're in your home, but yet a lot of times, like kids are kind of passively or sometimes directly discouraged from involving stepmom in those things, in those recognitions. I mean, that's part of why Stepmom's Day sort of became an unofficial holiday the Sunday after. So, granted, again, it's not on any calendar, but if you look it up, when is Stepmom's Day? you will find. And that's what's funny is actually when I got married, it happened to be on Stepmom's Day because we did it on a weekend with it. Yeah, it was super magical. It's like, I know it wasn't what was planned because the pandemic like threw a wrench in everybody's plans.
Well, I was there by video.
So, yep. You were there by video, but no, it was really kind of beautiful in that sense. But yeah, so basically, and there's a large body of research around chronic interpersonal conflict and stress responses. And one of the consistent findings is that unresolved ongoing conflict tends to create that hypervigilance, right? That hypervigilance that just as easily could be interpreted as this is as a good person trying their best under a very stressful dynamic can just as easily be interpreted as this is an evil stepmom trying to overstep, step in, and conquer, right? And we know what that does. We've talked about that. Your nervous system basically starts scanning constantly for potential problems, right? Like we know how this gets baked into our brains, like we talked about, I feel like in the social media stuff or maybe the illusion of free, right? Like what happens when that's the constant feeling or message. And what's really important is that research on divorce and child outcomes also consistently finds that high conflict between adults is often more psychologically damaging for the kids than the divorce itself. So yeah, it's like important to care about the mental health of our families, the full family, not just the kids. Like I think one of the best things I saw, and this was in one of those stepmom groups, so there's probably a little bit of that like underlying behavior that unfortunately I know is there, of like, the moms that will say they'll die for their kids, but will you live? Like, will you heal your unresolved trauma? Will you like look at your cycles that you can break, and like will you actually live for them? And that's like anybody in these situations, right? Like, I don't think that needs to be cut straight at mom. I think that could also go for dad. That could go for a stepdad looking to step into a situation where kids are involved, or a stepmom, that is interested in a fellow that's got kiddos because it matters, dadgummit. But right. So it's not that having multiple households hurts kids. It's chronic, unresolved tension between the adults inside that system because kids are not stupid. You can hide it as best as you can. And I think they always pick up on an inkling of it. Granted, hiding it is better than lashing out and having fights in front of them. Yes, you're doing a great job if it is that level of you're boiling and you hate each other, but at least you don't fight in front of the kids. But I think we do need to be very realistic that kids are crazy interpretive. Think about when you're all living in the same house and they know mom and dad have had a fight. Even if you didn't have it in front of them, like they're going to have that same sensitivity that sometimes builds like that, you're reading moods and everything in a house because that's a lot of what kids are doing. They are constant little scanners of information. And so if that's the information they're reading, in the household, of course they're going to notice it like in between the two. So good, better, best, right? Actually, I guess bad, good, best. Bad is like just lashing out and fighting in front of them, right? Good is at least having no inkling, even if, there's underlying tension. It's still there, not having any lashing out or anything and keeping it super shoved down successfully. And then the better or the best actually seems like if you can find a way to get along, because that seems to lead to better outcomes for kids. And I think this is actually something, I'm sorry if it comes up in my notes later, it just feels relevant to mention now too, that kids succeed with more healthy adult attachments, not less. So really in an ideal situation, a good stepmom can give your child better outcomes. And just like any other human in a dynamic, that person does kind of need to be supported though, right? Any human in the dynamic needs to be supported for that to kind of work. So they can be a good influence if our culture could just flip the script on this already.
And I think the biological parents what they do have to ultimately keep in mind is that if they do split with the other biological parent and the other biological parent meets another human being that they become romantically involved with, and that becomes a long-term deal, you don't want to be the one that tries to sabotage everything just because you're upset that the other biological parent went and found somebody else, right? Because when kids are involved, the kids should be the focus, and the best decisions for the kids should be the focus. Now, does that mean that there will not be conflict? That would be stupid of me to say. There's still going to be conflict. Like, I know with me, with my ex-wife, like, I don't want to be in a room with her. I just don't,
Yeah.
She doesn't want that from me either, being fair. But, when it comes to stuff with the kids, I think we both have a pretty good track record, in our case of, making those best decisions for the kids, trying to keep the ego out of it. But I can also see where it's pretty easy to not take the ego out of it and still keep that ego and do what you can to sabotage and just make life as difficult for the other person as possible, just because how dare they be happy now?
Yeah, and it's like so odd, and that's like part of that whole consideration, though, right? And this is where it's like I do just wish family court were better. If the family court is going to get money from the abundance of cases that end up being taken to them in any given year, I do believe some of that should go to coursework being required for the parents with children to potentially talk about some of this stuff, that these things do matter. And that where there is high conflict, I almost wish that, judges were more quick to order things like co-parent therapy. These things exist for a reason. It's because it shows better outcomes for kids, right? And because it makes sense that kids absorb emotional tension constantly, whether you're having the fights in front of them, whether they're behind closed doors, whether you're getting along, they're watching that. And also, when you're getting along, you're modeling how to get along. So you're showing them, I don't know, do you hope that your kid like eventually gets into a relationship down the road and maybe it ends up that either that divorces and they bring in a step, or they themselves become a step? Like, wouldn't it be cool if you got the opportunity to model an ideal situation for them? Because if we go back to the blended family is not going anywhere. Like, and if we don't talk about it, it's going to stay emotionally complex and mental health wearing down as it is today, because it still is. It's not as bad as it was, but it's still really mentally wearing, and not just on the stepmom, on everybody involved. I want to make sure I keep mentioning that because, I feel self-conscious about talking about it as a stepmom, I guess. But I do have kind of an interesting personal analogy that I wanted to bring up because the Mr. Reverend and I think I've mentioned before, we are analogy king, queen, royalty. Like, we love a good analogy to drive home like a feeling or a situation or help somebody understand something, right? That we feel we have a good understanding of, but we kind of understand other people don't. And so the one that I use for blended families that's helped me make a lot of sense of this emotionally is, I call it the family van analogy. And so I started thinking about blended families like a family van. Everybody is inside the same vehicle, but everybody is sitting in different seats with different views out of the window. And being a stepmom can sometimes feel like being emotionally inside the van while not always knowing who has their hands on the wheel, and still feeling responsible for helping everyone get where they need to go safely. Like, especially if you see something that feels relevant, right? Like a car is like about to merge in, you might want to say something out loud, right? But depending on who's driving at the moment can affect how welcome that input even is. Sometimes one person experiences your involvement as support and helpful, while another one experiences as interference and overstepping. And I think that tension is emotionally exhausting because it creates this constant uncertainty around where exactly you fit. And I think that analogy even kind of brings it out, like, to where this can even be stressful for the person driving that doesn't want the input, or the person driving that does want the input, but for some reason this person's being oddly quiet about the situation, right? So it creates tension all around. That's why I kind of liked the van situation. And then sometimes as children age, you might not know it, but at some point, one of the kids might be driving an emotional situation, right? So it gets even more complicated. Like, you don't want to reach for that steering wheel while the new teen is behind the wheel. Like, oh my gosh, I could see that being taken poorly even as the bio parent, right? So, like, just talking about the analogy for sure, but yeah. So I've that's one that's helped me kind of cope with some stuff. And yeah, family systems researchers consistently find that unclear boundaries and unclear authority structures increase tension inside these blended families. So it was really kind of cool in researching for this episode to more or less find that there are researchers that have talked about it. They haven't put it into a nice little analogy like I've built over the years, but more or less, like, it kind of holds to the van analogy. But right, like, it kind of makes it easy to see where so far what we've talked about, it's a recipe for some mental health struggles for the person involved in an ecosystem like this.
Well, think about the times where you're driving and you do have a passenger, and the passenger will try to tell you to get to a certain location in a way that they would if they were the one driving, but have a particular way that you drive. You want to be able to go the routes that you want to go to, and how annoying that could potentially be. It's like, there's something to be said, when it comes to that analogy, and that is a good analogy, by the way, to put your mind into each of the people in that van, if at all possible, because the one driving, it's a big deal, it's a big responsibility to be able to drive and take people that you're driving to the location they want to go to. But the person that's offering you a different way to go is not being bad, they're not being annoying, but they're offering you their 2 cents. Does that mean you have to take it? No, you're the one behind the wheel. But
exactly.
yeah, but it's
right.
like you do want to try to understand the other people in the seats as well when you're in a vehicle.
It goes back to, it depends on the relationship with the person in the back seat. And there are other like common things in our culture that helps even explain this, right? Because do you view that person as a backseat navigator or a backseat driver? You know what I mean? Like, there's an attitude to that. We have a term for it, backseat driver. That's that annoying person that always needs to interject. And so, but that's going to depend on your relationship, right? Because if you've got this person that's constantly interjecting and you don't appreciate that feedback, that's going to be tension building for you too, and frustrating and annoying and unwelcome. But meanwhile, if you're driving and you see that person is more like, oh my gosh, this person, like, I know Google will tell me some ways to get somewhere, but they always seem to know where to go. So if you view that person as a backseat navigator, then that's going to bring more calm to you. That's going to bring more assurance than anything, because you have more information that you feel like you can rely on between the two. Because, well, you know what? Even if they're wrong back there in the back seat, because the side note that I don't think I mentioned is, as the step parent, you don't get to be in the front seats, really. Like, that's the thing, is it's really parent A, parent B, and you're normally in the back seat. So there's even some stuff that you can't see, right? Because you can't like see as well, like in the front seats or the front mirrors, etc. Right? So I don't know. Like I said, I've kind of built this whole thing, and it's helped me really process my role in my family system.
And it can take time for the person in the driver's seat to trust the backseat navigator as well, because if they don't know that person, don't know the directions that they want to go, they may not know that the backseat navigator is offering them a quicker way to get to the destination they want to go to.
Exactly. But that requires an openness, right? Like you have to yourself, that's that shadow work part of it for everybody involved, is you have to check your own self and your own openness to even being cool with this person being viewed as like a positive implement to your life, right? And what's funny is healthy co-parenting feels weird to people, and I will say it, I have lost a friend expressing my preference for wanting to get along with the Mr. Reverend's co-parent. But yeah, our culture often normalizes the conflict in blended families so much more than cooperation, That's the other side of normalization of it, right? Because people who see our media and see these dynamics are not just people who eventually become blended families. That would be silly. It's also people on the outside too, right? So when we see things that don't make sense, that gets also labeled as outgroups or weird. But no, so one thing I've noticed is like when stepmoms and biological moms actually get along well, people almost react suspiciously to that too. And I think that's why that likely is. This can't be real. Somebody secretly hates somebody. This is fake. Like, there's no way these people get along and all this, blah, 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 right? And I think that says something really interesting about what we culturally expect from blended families. So, this is like stepping out of what is expected in the system and more talking about like it's further complicated by what expected outside the system, too, right? Because our culture does that. When we see something that seems strange, we're going to look for it. And because of that negativity bias, we're more likely to suspect the bad thing is going on than an actual good thing, right? So even there's like, well, they're only being nice because they're hiding, blah, blah, blah. Or this person's only doing this because, they secretly work this job under the table and make thousands of dollars more than they hide. You know what I mean? Like it's so funny, like what you hear. And those are actually things I saw in one of the stepmom groups that I wound up leaving, by the way, because it just kind of constantly was turning in to anonymous posts about people just airing their dirty underwear, like not even just their laundry, just airing the worst parts of their laundry on the internet. I'm like, I don't need that. I do not need that in my scroll, man. But yeah, so we almost expect that behavior going on in the background, basically, is what I was saying. Like, even if you're outside of these systems, you play a role in this because it would be nicer if more people encouraged it and maybe even had an expectation built around, well, statistically speaking, this is probably a good mom and this is probably a good step parent, stepmom. Like, so maybe the cocked eye should be more towards when they can't find a path to get along. Right. And that would help socially correct. Right. We've talked about that before, where it's like social correction, like, is kind of important. But when nobody is doing that, there's no reason to really correct the behavior. Like, you could still at least go to the internet and find it, right? Like, we talked a little bit about social media and how it allows for those pockets of, well, even if you would have been socially outcast, you can still go find a group that supports you. But I guess what I'm saying is, but we don't even do that socially, like in real life. We don't tend to outcast over, well, just doing this hyperbolically. I'm not saying I have this attitude. Well, you guys can't be adults and get along. So what is wrong with you guys? Right? Like, granted, that's still not necessarily a good attitude to have, but I almost question if that wouldn't be somehow better than just like, well, of course they don't get along. They're mom and stepmom. Tale as old as time. Like, that we just accept it and embrace it and don't question it at all. So our friends are more likely to have our backs, right? Like, to kind of like, well, yeah, of course this is what's going on because that's the step parent. Or yes, of course that's what she's doing because that's the mother. She's going to try to do this and she's going to try to take that and she's going to try to do this to get back at you. Like, there is so much of that. And that was the other reason, like, I needed to stop talking to that friend. I was ultimately fine that they told me I was effing weird and didn't want to talk to me anymore. I'm like, that's fine. That's cool. I don't need your narrative in my head, like constantly trying to convince me somebody is bad just for existing in my area. You know what I mean? Like,
and it's weird because you do kind of get that when it comes to like relationships as well. Like, I've lost a friend because at one point, this friend was someone that I would go to with like issues I was having with other like romantic partners and whatnot. Like, I don't like when they did this. I don't like when they did that. And this friend did have my back, but what it was turning into was they were having my back no matter what. They were always thinking that the other person in question was the most evil human being on the face of the earth. And when I would try to counter with, okay, yeah, I'm telling you this stuff when I'm upset, doesn't mean that I'm necessarily right either,
That's like part of, we've talked about this with relationships and how we have kind of a toxic dating culture that is sometimes supported by our friends. And like we are taught to demonize exes over amicably splitting. And that even follows us to this topic here, right? Because when we are more practiced at demonizing over amicably splitting, we don't have any practice. And when kids are involved, we don't have any practice, Tim. So, like, it's just questioning things about our culture, right? And that's really, like, again, why we talk about half the things we talk about here is talking about, like, but why does it have to be this way? If we have a culture that says that it appreciates mental health and psychology and neurology and the sciences, why can't we do better as a culture at listening to those things and trying to figure out how to change them? Because even if you're going on a think of the children, let's pretend adult feelings and adult mental health doesn't matter and we're just thinking of the children, right? Research on interparental conflict consistently finds that high conflict between caregivers predicts worse emotional and behavioral outcomes for kids. Like, by contrast, cooperative co-parenting tends to be associated with greater emotional stability, lower anxiety, better overall adjustment, and healthier attachment outcomes. And that's what's fascinating, is that children generally benefit more from emotional predictability and safety than from rigid loyalty structures between adults, which is often what our culture more seems to quietly demand. Right? So if you really want to think of like the kids and the future generations, again, even as an outsider, how we treat when we see people getting along, or even how we question or help our friends navigate not getting along. You don't always have to be the yes man. Hopefully, oh my gosh, Tim knows I am this way for him at least, and he is this way for me. Like, have a good devil's advocate friendship. Like, have that in your friendships, not because they're being difficult and fighting with you. Have it with the people who want to help you vet and help you with that shadow integration work, basically, that you know is like going to be honest with you. Like, I have a handful of people. The Bishop Chris is one of them. Tim the nerd is another one of my besties. Like, it's important to have those people and make sure you're not just giving yourself placate people, right? Because this is something we can all get involved with and help change this. Because even if you're only caring about the kids' mental health and future generations, this is a big dynamic that we really could use to change in our culture.
I think something to keep in mind as well, too, is you do not have to like the step parent to still be cooperative with them in a situation like that. If your ex romantic partner wants to be romantic with somebody else and then they become a step parent along the way, you don't have to like them. No one is telling you have to form any sort of relationship that you don't want to have with this person. However, they are going to be a part of your kid's life. And if that is the case, find ways that you can to be cooperative for the sake of the kids. And you can do that without having to like the other person.
Exactly. And I think that goes back to that. Like I said, it's normally good, better, best, but we'll say bad, better, best, because bad is the straight out always having the conflicts and the emotional upheaval and stuff like that. Best really is getting along, like finding a way to get along and co-parent. Because really the idea is you just want to keep the stability. You want to keep the boat stable, right? So is everybody fighting and the boat is constantly rocking and going crazy? Is everybody working together and like successfully communicating and trading duties? Or do we have your duties in your half of the ship and our duties in our half of the ship? And that's what's called parallel parenting, which is totally reasonable, especially when you want to avoid the high escalation, like the waves, right? Especially if it's always high conflict, or if there's even times where you get along and then abruptly don't anymore. There is reason to believe, in looking at these studies, that potentially moving to something more parallel and super sterile is better for the kids than like continuing like the ups and downs and the waves of it, right? Because we talk about things that's already come up a few times in this topic, is it really comes down to the stability of the household, right? And we've talked about child mental health, and this even goes into that actually may even fare better for the adults involved too, right? Because it kind of becomes like this sterile thing that you're dealing with. It is just paperwork. It is just a dollar amount. It is just blah, blah, blah. Like, it doesn't have to be as emotionally charged. So anything that removes the emotional charge is going to be better and have healthier outcomes for the kids. That's what a lot of those studies were showing. Like, it didn't just look at everybody's braiding each other's back hair versus everybody's yelling and fighting all the time. Like, they did look at a lot of the middle, and yeah, there's a lot of reason and stuff that supports even the sterile. They can tell there's tension, but you found a way to manage it, maybe even a little bit more logically focused, is better than the high turmoil one. So that's kind of the interesting stuff. And yeah, right, like, it makes sense because they're little humans. Like, how well do you operate? Like, you got to think about, like, the different management styles, right? You got the manager that there's no rules. You have no idea what's going on. They're just going to come in and yell at you one day. You've got the manager that is, like, super chummy and, like, really nice, and are really nice to work with. Like, they're not just doing that as a front. Like, they actually do functionally manage well. And then you've got the ones that are a little bit cold into the book, but at least you know what the expectations are. Like, you can screw up 3 times before you get pulled into their office. You know what I mean? So, like, we can actually empathize with this as adults in most situations. Like, say, there I go, making another analogy again. Like, we can understand where this actually does create better stability for kids. And so, like, whichever one you want to roll with, right? Like, you don't have to be besties. You don't have to co-read No One's the Bitch. That was actually a book that I read early on. I thought that was going to be I think I actually wound up cutting that from my notes. But Solid, by the way, that is a good book, especially if you can co-read it with them. That seems like it would have been cooler. But even if you are in that dynamic at all, if you are a mom or a stepmom and you want to just read, I thought it was really cool because it was a mom and stepmom who admittedly did not like each other at first. And they worked through a lot of stuff to like each other. And I think if I can share one of my big takeaways from it was that it helped me understand where a mom feels very vulnerable. Like, in the sense of the mom doesn't know, because again, this is mom to stepmom, so a lot of she, her, mom, stepmom, but she doesn't know what all information has been shared about her to this new human that she doesn't even know. And that can be very, like, vulnerable feeling on their part. So it actually can help because it was co-written. I think it does a really successful job of, like, trying to reach for some of that empathy. So if you're struggling with that, solid book recommendation. I think it's even on, like, Spotify Premium. If you've got, like, a family account, they're doing some free promo for, like, some hours of free listening or whatever for audiobooks. Solid listen, solid read. I actually got it and read it because there's, like, some workbook stuff you can do. Just a fun little side note if you want to keep that for yourself. But yeah, so we could all work on not normalizing this. Like, we all have parts in our culture, but it is also important to point out that there are harmful step-parent dynamics too.
Agreed.
That totally right, that this exists for the reason, because I think this conversation only works, any of our conversations work, if we acknowledge both realities. Because I personally had a harmful step monster experience growing up. I don't even like to call her my stepmom because my joke is there's nothing particularly mom or motherly about her. So I know firsthand that abusive or damaging step-parent dynamics absolutely exist. And I think sometimes conversations defending stepmoms can accidentally swing too far into pretending all blended family systems are healthy, because they're not. Because some people did experience neglect. We did experience manipulation and sometimes straight out cruelty as a child, and technically abuse. Those experiences are absolutely real. But I also think our culture has become so attached to the evil stepmother narrative because maybe it's fun to talk about, right? It goes to that negativity bias. That's what makes the negative water cooler chat, like, so tasty, right? Like, we like warning each other. We talked about this before. But yeah, I think that's what makes that narrative about healthy blended families almost look suspicious by comparison, because we are so wired, like, evolutionarily speaking, to, like, focus on things that are negative and look for dangers. And so without that change to our major culture, I just don't think this is going to be something that does change. Like, it's not just the family, it's the culture that needs to change around it.
And I think if we take a look at another example, I mean, if we go the political route, like people on welfare, If you take a look at something like the welfare system in this country, like people's misconception of it is that a lot of people on welfare are taking advantage of the system when the numbers show that that is not really the case. Having said that, are there people that do take advantage of it? Of course. Should those people be punished for taking advantage of the system? Of course. But most people, trying to take advantage, use welfare in this country because they need it, are using it because they need it. And I think, if we kind of parallel that with, what we're doing, what we're talking about here, it's like, are there bad step parents? Of course. Is that a large number? I don't believe so. Do I have the numbers on hand? No, I do not. But I don't think the numbers would necessarily be too high in terms of bad step parents out there. I just,
Right.
it's just important to recognize that they are there, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to something like this. To use that phrase, you want to acknowledge the bad, you want to treat the bad when that happens, but you don't want to assume everything is bad.
Right. Like, are there stepmoms that come in trying to replace a mom? Yes. Are there stepmoms that come in thinking that they need to, for some reason, have their husband prove that they're really their number one person? Which, I'm going to be real, I feel was my experience with my stepmonster. Yes, that exists. But, like, I think it exists more at the rate of illegal voting, right? Like, you can't go, aha, it happened here, therefore it must always be, or must be this huge problem. And it's just not, right? And granted, I go back to, I saw some of that attitude of like, well, I should be put first and I should da 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 da. And I think that goes into kind of like closing this up, like wrapping up towards reframing the stepmom role. Because a healthy stepmom isn't trying to replace a parent. She's trying to help stabilize a system. And I want to interject a personal opinion here that I feel quite strongly about. If you are not willing to, at minimum, be willing to help stabilize a family system, please do not date people with kids. Please, please do not. And that is not like, that is just a being honest with yourself question. I am not demonizing you. I would only like say maybe you're kind of crap if you go into it knowing you can't do that, or knowing you're not willing to, and you still waltz in there like all into it. Like, there's a difference between thinking you can do something and then not, like realizing you can't. And that is, please do the responsible thing and don't be in that relationship anymore, like for the actual kids' sake. And I say this being somebody who has had to break up with somebody who had kids that were like old enough to like know me and be around me, right? Like, it wasn't like, oh, well, bye to your infant, I'm so sorry. Like, older kids of playing age that knew who I was and looked forward to me being around, right? Like, I say that with having had to do that, it was super hard. But you don't need to demonize them. You can just realize it's not for you. That's not the reason why I had to leave, just to be super clear. Like, it was for other reasons. I'm just saying that is a valid reason to not continuing a relationship with somebody with kids, is going into it thinking you can put certain things to the side and then having that realization that you cannot. And this is the same for any relationship, right? Sometimes you don't know your price of admission until you're in there realizing, oh, I can't pay this, or oh, no, I really do need this, right? So I just want to say that, like, I'm not saying it with any stink. I am just saying, please be willing to at least do that.
Yeah, because that could lead to further hurt down the road. You don't want to pretend that you are cool with something, to let it fester within you and then blow up at a later date, because that, will hurt the kids even more at that point, because they've developed a relationship with you and now you're completely out of the picture, and there's no legal reason whatsoever that you have any chance of seeing those kids again. It's possible that one of the parents might be nice enough to let you visit, but if you're just a step and you're out of the situation, there's no recourse to let you see those kids at all. I mean, the parents could easily just, even block you on their kids' social media.
Yeah, right? Like, it even little things like that. But But yeah, I think one of the healthiest shifts blended families can make is letting go of the idea that every role has to perfectly mirror a traditional nuclear family. And I think this would also help get rid of that fear of the anybody's trying to replace anybody else. Right. I mean, I know like as far as relationship structures go, we've talked about polyamory on the show before. And if you've ever looked into any of those structures and how they kind of view like emotional time and bandwidth and things like that, like yeah, there is an openness of being able to realize that roles don't have to look traditional. So blended families don't have to always replicate, right? Like a stepmom does not necessarily need to become another mom, like a copy and paste, like to have a meaningful emotional impact. Sometimes the healthiest role is just a supportive adult, like a teacher or a counselor or something at school, right? An emotionally safe person, a stabilizing presence, or a cooperative teammate. Right? Like you don't have to be like, I'm your mommy. I'm mommy 2.0. Like you don't have to have that, especially if the kid is not into it. Right? Like think about any teacher that's tried to be super chummy with you when you didn't want it, like how fudging awkward that feels. Like you don't have to be that person. But honestly, kids do usually benefit from having more emotionally safe adults in their lives, not fewer. So the goal shouldn't be ownership, it should be emotional safety and stability. And that's the thing to take home is that's the attitude and the thing that you really should be willing to keep in mind if you are wanting to step into a step parent role.
Offer that to the kids and let them be the ones to decide it, like if they want to call you mom or dad. Be that support system for them because they're part of the deal when you are romantically involved with someone with kids. They are part of the deal. Even someone with adult kids like me, my kids are part of the package. If you date this wonderful human like that is me. And but let them decide ultimately what they want from you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of like what I was saying because it's awkward, right? If you want like you have this daydream of being the stepmom and you're gonna, the birds and the butterflies are gonna fly in behind you as you do dishes and everything's going to be appreciated and you're going to get Mother's Day gifts. Like if you like go into it with that high of an expectation, that you're likely gonna possibly be crushed, like especially because like our culture doesn't lean to that being the normal expectation.
More Disney. That's more Disney right there.
That's exactly like a little bit Disney influence there in my imagery. But yeah, like it's just kind of owning that it doesn't need to be that either. But it also should not be pushing away and cold and completely uninvolved either, right? But right, so essentially family resilience research consistently and not surprisingly at all finds that children tend to do best in environments that are emotionally predictable, low conflict, cooperative, flexible, and emotionally safe. And healthy blended systems usually become healthier when adults stop competing for emotional territory and start focusing on system stability instead. And so, yeah, it goes back to you don't need to be like the braiding each other's everything hair, and you don't need to be like the stepmom that you have this expectation that your kids are just going to love you and want all of this. Like you can also be just that stable adult. Maybe part of it is that you consistently kind of stay out of it or stay emotionally flat as you can during certain topics. If that's the best you can do, that is still better than being like this complete slave to emotions, highly emotional reactive, doing highly emotional reactive conversations and arguments. Like it's better than that. Is it the best? Maybe not, but it is definitely better, right? Like if that's the best you can muster, but you need to at least be able to do that part.
Because kids are involved and it's not about ego. You have to check your ego at the door, and it's hard to do. I'm not trying to say that that's something easy to do, but the goal should be what is best for the kids. And at times in situations to where a step parent is involved, if you check that ego and try to make the best possible decision for the kids, then, everybody wins at that point. Again, we're not saying you have to like the other step parent, because even I've seen like on Instagram, it could have possibly been the same people that wrote that book that you mentioned, but there was these two women, a mother and a stepmother, that had the shared Instagram account, and they were always drinking wine and all happy and all that stuff. And I found myself being annoyed at that, but
How dare you?
I know, right? But it's like, you don't have to be that level of close with the other person to still do what is right, because like
Right.
at the end of the day, once the kids turn 18 anyway, like you don't necessarily have to see that step parent ever again, right?
Right. And that's where it's like, I do fully understand and appreciate like some of the parallel parenting plans that they are starting to recognize as being functional, and some of the tools that kind of help that. Like, there's even like family apps, like I'll say, just because learning about it over the years, of Our Family Wizard. And it's like a one stop. You could do all communication through their file sharing, and you can even turn on like this little AI thing that's called like tone meter to like help you, like, this might be passive aggressive, or you might not want to phrase it this way, like just to really try to help with the communication and take some of the tension out. Like, there is actually really cool technology that can help with some of this stuff. And I think that's like totally worth mentioning, that the bad, better, and best, the better is getting better. Like, that there's real stuff. And hey, guess what? You don't want to do tone meter and stuff like that. If you're open to like AI, that sure seems like it could be a total conversation that you can save under a project, like under your chat GPT or whatever you want to use, of like, hey, this person said this, can you help me draft something back? And that can actually help you get a conversation started. Or, this is what I want to say, and type it out. And it can be like, that's probably a little emotionally raw, and this might be misread. Let's do this. Like, there are so many tools out there that can help actually be where that better middle is even more of a better good than better neutral as it used to be, as you think about it.
And we should be taking advantage of any tools out there that can help, like like AI, like a Chat GPT or whatever. And for the critics out there, I know there are a lot of drawbacks of AI, including the huge data centers that are being made and affecting the environment. And I think over time, hopefully, stuff like that can be changed and fixed for the benefit of everybody in a positive way. But, a tool is a tool and should be used as such. And if it can be used in a way that helps you not be snarky, then it's a good tool.
Yep, there's just better ways of dealing what is becoming a growing reality for more people. And you know what? Even if using tools like that for a little while, like, could you imagine if it really significantly reduced the number of households that were high conflict, and just made more that were in this sterile, better range? Well, then I think that could honestly help even more of those evolve into some of the better ones, where it's like, yeah, everybody's got their little team jerseys of mom, dad, stepmom, stepdad, and everybody's there like with their team picture of their kids. Like, I saw some of that too, and it's so funny how much shade would get thrown in the stepmom groups about posts like that. And it very well like might have been the co-writers. Like, I could see them doing that, right? Because they need to publicize their book, they need to do their thing with it. So I could see them doing that. But also, it's just like, but if you want to normalize something, that's kind of how you make it happen now, is you have to post the pictures of it. So yeah, sure, they could accuse them of it's a front to sell their book. But unfortunately, if they actually are passionate about it, which you would assume that they would be passionate about it, right? Wrote a book, came together, went through their own struggles. This is like some real life story stuff. That, maybe they're invested in trying to normalize the behavior and showing that you can get along, that you can have like a rich relationship where everybody doesn't have to be super hyper vigilant all the time because they're constantly worried about the other person trying to either use something against them or try to one up them in some form or fashion. Basically, blended families usually don't struggle because there are too many people loving the child. They struggle when the adults stop feeling emotionally safe with each other. And that is the big mental health takeaway of how this really is about the stepmom mental health, and all of the adults involved. And if we don't focus on understanding why a mom acts like a mom and those effects that they have, or why a step parent maybe acts like a step parent and like what effects that can have, like we're trying to build a recipe, I feel, with this month of breaking cycles if you're interested, right? And even like bringing a light to the fact that the mental health of these figures in our lives very much matter. For example, yes, I talk about my step monster and kind of how that was, but I also have kind of grown over time to appreciate that she was raised in a certain culture and a time herself. And that a lot of those needs to be recognized as the number one important special person normally comes from something probably unhealthy, either in a past relationship, whether it be a romantic one or her family herself. I am not saying that I know anything and putting her dirty laundry out on a line or anything. I'm just saying I understand that it probably comes from somewhere. I know we don't like the adage as much anymore because I feel like we've demonized it, that hurt people. But there is a point in which that I accept that reality, that most people are actually pretty good and are more a system of, or more an outcome of systems they've created as a result of their childhood or raising, or like situations that they've had through a certain period of adulthood. That's more of who you're dealing with. Most people are not people struggling with narcissistic personality disease or anything like that. A lot of it are defense mechanisms, good or bad they may be, that have developed over this person experiencing various experiences and traumas, childhood through adulthood. And so I think if we can understand that about people, it can help us unpack our own experiences with people that have not been the greatest.
Because even the best person out there is still the villain in somebody else's story.
Right.
Blunt and to the point.
We try. But I think that wraps us up for this topic. I think we can totally put a pin in this one. Sorry, these are a little bit longer. Or at least we're not doing 2-hour ones anymore. Like we've curved that, but obviously with trying to combine mental health month and mental health of mom, like these were going to be wordier. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope they haven't been completely intolerable, that they've been more me-led this month, and then we still have to figure out next month.
I have been enjoying it. I'll put that out there again. I have enjoyed the results here. I love re-listening to them, even when I hear the baby Reverend in the background pop up every now and then. It's always fun to re-listen.
Oh, yes. Tim mentioned in one of our little asides just now when I was being demanded of my attention briefly that he may try to gather all of the snippets at some point. Just proof of baby Reverend, that he actually does exist. I don't just shove him in a corner with his YouTube. Granted, he's with being the stomach flu stuff going, or the stomach bug. I don't want to call it a flu because this was really quick. But the stomach bug that came in and out of our house, it seems like he's had a lot more like access to his YouTube lately. And I'm like, bud, you got to know this is temporary. This is just because your body needs rest, but your silly little baby brain still wants to go play and go to the trampoline park. Yeah, stomach bug to the trampoline park. Sign me up for that embarrassment. Like, nope, you get one public puking on me a month. Like, no.
Yeah, there's a punch card for that too. After the 10th puking,
You owe me a very expensive Mother's Day gift as soon as you get a job. Like,
your first check is
your entire first paycheck. Oh my gosh, that would be funny. Like, oh my god, like no. Like in reality, no. Joking, awesome. In reality, don't do that to your kids ever. Like that never plays well.
Yeah. Well, what do you have in store for us next week to wrap up Motherhood Month?
So to wrap up Motherhood Month, I'm going to be blunt. The next week's topic might be a little bit sensitive for many, but it's another one that I experienced personally, and I think we need to talk about it more. And that is, we are going to focus on postpartum depression. It is something that is very relevant in the motherhood experience, and I think it would have not done it justice to try to loop it in like with psychology of mom or with psychology of a stepmom, because you have to understand postpartum depression happens to stepmoms too who have kids, right? And if you're dealing, like, you can also see some of the recipe with some of the stuff we talked mentally about mom. That if you're dealing with a high conflict, high stress situation, how sometimes that can also exacerbate a system as well. So I do want to try to touch on the different experiences that can also couple with postpartum depression, anxiety, and then also like possibly going into the difference between the experience of a mom who stays at home who presents with it versus a mom who does have to go back to work and presents with it. So we'll get a little bit more into those dynamics as well.
Yes, an episode that Tom Cruise would not approve of, folks. You know it's going to be good at that point.
Yes.
All right. Any other thoughts for our friends at home before we wrap up?
Oh, no, let's wrap this up so Tim can get to editing, and hopefully it's not going to be an hour and a half show for you guys.
No, at this point, it will not be. It will not be. But
nope, we did
right.
have a good breakaway for the baby earlier. So.
Yep. All right. Each week, we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Yo, stepmama's so hypervigilant, she double checks whether snacks count as co-parenting.
Oh, man.
Your faces are the greatest. I'm going to say it every time. Like you don't want to laugh, but you do.
Yeah, you got it out of me.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.